Would you rather have simplicity or not having to deal with smelly gas and changing jets? First, I want to compare the functionality and how they work, comparing the carb versus fuel injection. As far as the starting goes, so whether it's a hot start or cold start, the fuel injection bikes are almost always going to be better, especially with the cold start. So carburetors, they have a choke, which definitely helps if you're starting the engine when it's cold or in colder weather. Turn the choke on, electric start. There we go. Oh, I didn't keep the choke on long enough. But as you can see, as long as the carb is clean and jetted right, it's going to start up pretty well. But the fuel injection, it doesn't really seem to matter if the engine is cold or hot. It always seems to start just the same every time. It's about 35 degrees out right now. The engine is cold. I haven't started it today. I haven't started it for probably a week. And it starts right up. And for carburetors, once the engine gets warm, it usually starts just as well, but it can be more frustrating when the engine is cold and when you're just trying to start your bike for the first time during the day and it takes 5, 10, 20 kicks to get started, especially if the jetting is off. Next is the throttle response. Carb bikes can have really good, really snappy throttle response, but it takes very fine tuning of the carb jets, the circuits to get the jetting spot on so that it has really good, smooth, reliable throttle response. Whereas the fuel injection, the throttle response, in my experience, is almost perfect. There's basically no bog right from idle, so you can whack the throttle and it's not gonna bog because the fuel injection system knows how much fuel to put in based on the throttle position, where a carb, it's a little bit more likely to have that bog when you give it full throttle. Some people might complain, well, fuel injection has lame throttle response. It's very smooth, and they like the snap of that carburetor throttle response. This may actually be a problem and not a positive for the carb because it has less power or it's bogging at lower RPM, and then it has to build up that power and then it snaps. So it's wah, wah, and you get that cool snap, which can break the tire loose, and it's not very good for trying to conserve energy or building your confidence because snappy power is less predictable and it takes more energy to keep the bike in control. Then comparing torque and horsepower, well, when fuel injection first came out, you could probably complain that it didn't have as much power as carburetor, especially peak horsepower, although torque was just as good if not better. But now fuel injection has gotten so good that peak power is pretty much the same, and even if it's 2 to 5% less than a carburetor, it makes up for it in rideability, which is smoother torque curve. You don't get that sharp point on the dyno, which looks cool because you got big numbers, but when you get that smooth power curve, this makes it so much easier to ride your bike faster and safer because the power is more predictable. It's not snappy and jerky, which means that you're going to get more traction and you're going to stay in control of the bike better. And lastly, in the functionality is elevation. So I've gone up in the mountains quite a few times and I'm always having to change jets if I want the bike to start and to run properly because the air is thinner, there's less oxygen at higher elevation. So riding at 1,000 feet here in Minnesota to 9 to 12,000 plus feet out in Colorado, power is down 30 to 40%, and the jetting, you're going to be going down a few sizes if you want the bike to run right. So you can get the bike to run just as well as far as throttle response goes, but it's just more time consuming and frustrating because the carb, it doesn't auto-tune the air-fuel ratio for you, whereas the fuel injection, it's going to automatically compensate because it knows how much oxygen is in the air. So you can ride it at 1,000 feet or 12,000 feet, and it's still going to have that same throttle response. It's not going to have the same power, but neither is the carb bike.
Now this is just one area of comparing carb versus EFI, and if you want to learn the differences when it comes to tuning and why you may or may not want a carb or fuel injection dirt bike, you should watch this video right here or subscribe if it's not out yet.